El in the Canaanite pantheon of the gods. Mark S. Smith and Frank Moore-Cross are two that just come to the top of my head. Some of my favorite scholars, and I keep reading them and rereading them and learning more and more and more from them. And they've just written recently in the 1980s, 90s, and up into our day. He says, and he's using an archaeological discovered text here. And this is how the scholars do it. I mean, there is a connection between biblical research and archaeological research. But what he says about the archaeological text is very interesting. This, again, is why I contend that we can't use archaeology as the final statement, because what we discover changes what we think we used to know. And it really does. And this is a beautiful example of this. Again, I'm not disparaging archaeology. I'm just showing the ephemeral nature of archaeology as a final say-so in things. That's not necessarily the case. He notes on page 3 that more than a decade ago, so this had been in the 1930s, the discovery of the old Aramaic inscription of Sujan, that is sapphire, written in the second half of the 8th century BC, has confronted us with the puzzling mention of El and Elyon as two distinct deities. So here's this polytheistic picture again. It doesn't seem like we can escape this as far as the biblical background goes. El and Elyon now, archaeologically, in 1944, he shows, was demonstrated to be two separate deities. This is the God of Melchizedek mentioned in Genesis 14. This is really interesting. Is it talking about one God or two? See, I have seen folks who claim that textual criticism and biblical archaeology and historical linguistic scholarship, none of this changes any major doctrines in the Bible. This is the major doctrine of the Bible that we are seeing a fundamental change in. This is astonishingly very important. So, I think the critics are kind of dreaming there. There's some seriously interesting changes going on. And I'm just showing you how for the last 60 years at a minimum, I have an article on the mother goddess of the ancient Hebrews dating back to 1913. It's in German. I'll translate it for you and get it to you. Eugene Sach uses it quite a bit, and it's fascinating. So if El and Elyon are two separate deities, we understand much better a biblical passage unquestionably old, namely Balaam's oracle in Numbers 24:16, where the two names El and Elyon appear in parallelism. Now, this is an interesting state of affairs. This archaeological discovery that El and Elyon are two separate deities actually helps us understand better other biblical passages. Now, that's fascinating, isn't it? Even though it's a doctrine that some Christians might really be uncomfortable with, this is the archaeological picture. What even gets more interesting is how De La Vida says, because of this archaeological discovery, and because this discovery actually helps us understand Balaam's oracle, we now understand, it should be clear now, that El and Elyon should not be considered, as they used to be, as synonyms of Yahweh, but what we have here is two different, although they are related, divine beings. The sequence, this is on page 3 still, he says the sequence of El and Elyon, shaman, in the Sujan inscriptions, tallies exactly with the statement of Sanchuniathon about Elyon, who is called the Most High, and who became the father of Epigeios, the one who is above the earth, called later Uranus. The latter married his sister, Gay, the earth. Now here again, I understand, well, and they begot 4 sons, the first of whom was Elos, also called Kronos. So here again, we have this theme. I'm well aware that it's the theme of the marriage of the heaven and the sky, or the heaven and the earth, and so on and so forth. But the theme of the marriage of the gods, even though it's applied to natural forces, was also applied to earthly beings and heavenly gods and goddesses also, even the very forces of nature. So this theme of the multiple gods and the marriage of the gods was even being discussed in 1944 in relation to Elyon in Genesis chapter 14. So this is interesting that these themes have been developed and expanded. They certainly haven't been outdated. In our day and age, they've become more powerful still. They haven't been outdated to say, oh no, that was the old mythology, and it was an incorrect conception, this idea of the gods being married, and multiple gods and goddesses and all that. Oh no, that has come out far stronger in even in the last decade now. But I just want you to be aware that this has been going on for decades, and now it directly involves us with Melchizedek in the book of Genesis and his deity, or deities. And this is the Melchizedek Abraham had very interesting ties with. So this is interesting material. Now he notes that in the triad, the names and roles of Elyon and Shaman are clear. Elyon, through the transparent etymology of his name, appears to have been thought of as the lord of the astral sky. He is the seat of sun, moon, and stars, whereas Shaman probably was the god of the atmospheric or the meteoric sky, where storms are formed. So he would therefore be the same as Baal Shamim Hadad. As for El, he appears in Sanchuniathan in close connection with the earth, his mother. He is the founder of towns and the father of the Titanids, the typical representatives of the elementary earthly forces. So this is an interesting situation where he's showing the various epithets and functions of the deities and how they are separate. Very interesting. And he says, El has been actually recognized as the Lord of Earth and has no connection whatsoever with heaven. Well, this has been expanded to include the heaven also. But in 1944, he's showing how some of the inscriptions he was aware of showed that he is the Lord of heaven and of earth. And he emphasizes the earthly connection with El. Very interesting how he does this. El was actually recognized as the Lord of Earth. A Neo-Punic inscription from Leptis Magna in Tripolitania, which, although it was published 16 years ago, has been overlooked by both investigators of Phoenician religion and Old Testament studies, may be reproduced here for the sake of convenience, and he reproduces it. He translates it and says, "To the Lord El, Lord of Earth. Le Adon Le'el Kon Aretz Bano." Very interesting how it shows how he is the Lord of Earth, and then it gives his genealogy. And then someone else heard his voice, and El blessed him, and so on and so forth. And this is on page 5. We possess here unquestionable evidence that the god El was worshipped in Phoenicia, North Africa, and that his name was accompanied by an epithet which corresponds literally to the epithet given in Genesis 14 to El Elyon. However, without the mention of heaven and Elyon. So this is where he's showing the establishment through the archaeological and the epigraphic evidence, the handwriting, the written on stones or potsherds, whatever, that El is associated with earth. And this is what he says scholars had overlooked. And it links El to the earth. And then he discusses the Sumerian cosmology